Okay, this to me is mind-boggling. So please, just for a few minutes, forget what you think you know about the Shroud of Turin. It was written off as a fake in the 1980s, but this is a new update on the ongoing Shroud of Turin investigation. Modern science has completed hundreds of thousands of hours of detailed study. It's mind-bending and intense research on the Shroud to determine whether or not it really is the linen burial cloth of Jesus Christ, as mentioned in the Gospels. The Shroud is the single most studied artifact in human history, and we know more about it today than we ever have. Apart from how it was created, we have no idea. Investigators, though, are now so convinced of its authenticity that $1 million has been offered to the museum, whose experts in the 1980s said it was a simple fake. They said you just knocked it up in the Middle Ages. They get their $1 million if they can show how it was made. David Rolfe is a British filmmaker who, in his 1978 documentary The Silent Witness, first brought the Shroud of Turin to public attention. A photography expert and, this is crucial, a devout atheist, Rolfe set out to explore how the image was created, confident, as a photography expert, that he'd be able to explain the process of its manufacture. He couldn't. Instead, during his research, he became convinced of the Shroud's authenticity. He went from hard atheism to agnosticism to Christianity by the end of his filming. And more on him in a moment and the $1 million. But in the same year, 1978, an international team of experts was given access to the Shroud for a continuous period of 120 hours. In 1981, after thousands of hours of subsequent scientific study, the group known as the Shroud of Turin Research Project, you can Google them and find them and read their report, they announced its findings to highly regarded peer-reviewed scientific journals. You can find all that information actually online or go to the website shroud.com, packed with information. Their conclusion was that the Shroud was not made by any process that we are aware of, and the image was, and still is, impossible to recreate using modern science. Now remember, no paint, no brushstrokes, no pigments, dyes or stains were used, scientifically proven. And remarkably, they discovered that the faint image is encoded with scientifically advanced three-dimensional information. This means that when looked at through an astronomical lens, the Shroud appears in 3 dimensions with the facial features clearly defined, complete with swellings and injuries. And when the image is scanned, it gives an anatomically accurate 3D model of a person. It sends shivers up my spine just saying that now. It's the only known illustration of its kind. But this kind of photography was developed by cosmologists in the 20th century and used by the likes of the Hubble Observatory to study planets and stars in the far-off universe. It is not used on Earth. It doesn't work in Earth. It only works in space. The system utilizes various techniques, too complicated to me, to create a sense of depth and allow measurements of valleys, craters, and mountain ranges on planets in our distant solar system. For the Shroud image to be encoded with this information, it shows that it was created using a technology not known to us in 1981. Therefore, the method of manufacture and the reason why it should be encoded to be read by space-age equipment could not be explained. Fast forward to the 21st century and the situation is still exactly the same. No one knows how the image was made. The only possible explanation for the creation of the image is that it was caused by an instantaneous burst of intense radiation light, energy that scorched the image into the linen. Now, this still, in the 21st century, cannot be recreated in laboratory conditions. But in 1988, the British Museum carried out carbon dating, which was very interesting, on a segment of the Shroud. I remember it well. And they pitted the Christian faith, who believed in the shroud, against modern science. They announced, the British Museum, their results showed that the shroud to be a forgery, that it was made during the medieval period at a time sometime between 1260 and 1390, although they still couldn't explain how it was made. Even though an Oxford University professor was quoted at a press release talking about the shroud at a conference, and he said, quote, "There was a multi-million-pound business in making forgeries during the 14th century. He said, someone just got a bit of linen, faked it up, and flogged it. Sounds easy, doesn't it?" Another one said, quote, "Anyone who believes in the shroud after this investigation should be a member of the Flat Earth Society." So they were very scathing. It was pretty clear, according to the British Museum, the shroud was a simple, easy to explain, and crucially, easy to make forgery. Easy for a medieval forger. But it's always been suggested that the museum made a mistake in its calculations by testing a repaired section of the shroud and an area that had been contaminated by any number of factors. Bacteria, manhandling, smoke damage. The shroud has survived several fires over several centuries, and as well as, of course, changing environments. It's moved around, and climates. It's travelled around the known world for centuries. Only one piece was removed for examination, not several from around the shroud. And this little section was taken from one corner of the linen cloth. Now, if you look online at illustrations of the shroud, you'll see pictures from the medieval ages, 700-800 years ago, right up to the 18th century. You will see people manhandling the shroud and holding it up at the corners as it was displayed to crowds. It's plainly obvious that the edges of the shroud have been damaged and replaced, particularly at the corners. It's also known that as the shroud passed from one wealthy owner to another, which it has always had a huge value, sections were cut off and sold off or given as gifts, maybe aristocratic weddings, royal christenings, that kind of thing. So therefore, around the edges, especially, there have been any number of repairs, replacement panels fitted, and this has happened over hundreds and hundreds of years. For accuracy, a section of the corner that the British Museum tested was the worst possible area to test. The test sample was also discovered to contain cotton, which would not have been present in the original shroud from the 1st century, and it is positive evidence of a later repair. Modern experts agree that the 1988 test results are now absolutely unreliable and invalid. Right. So back to the filmmaker David Rolfe. He was always convinced that the museum's methods of dating were flawed, so he continued with his investigations for decades. He's not alone here. There are at least 6 peer-reviewed scientific articles that challenge the results of the carbon dating from the British Museum. David Rolfe now claims to have the evidence to prove that the museum got it wrong, and this is revealed in his latest film. You'll find it on YouTube and elsewhere. It's titled, Who Can It Be? The film includes lines of previous known evidence that were conveniently forgotten about after the 1988 British Museum carbon dating announcement. So here's the evidence pointing towards the authenticity of the Turin shroud. So the image is a negative. Now, this wasn't discovered until the invention of photography in the 19th century. It's a negative. No negative images could ever have existed before the invention of the camera. We know it's several hundreds of years old. And when the photograph is reversed into positive, the image is much clearer. Later, of course, as we know, it was discovered that the image is encoded in 3-dimensional use for space photography, which science cannot explain. Nobody can. Can you? Pathology tests, it's had all sorts of tests. Pathology tests show that the image is a perfect and accurate representation of someone who has suffered a Roman crucifixion, as well as having separate wounds to the heart area and the head area, all corresponding to Gospel accounts. In 2022, so getting closer to today, a new forensic wide-angle X-ray was applied to the cloth, and it was later published in the journal Heritage. It showed the results were compatible with the theory that the shroud is 2,000 years old, not medieval. Investigations and comparisons show that the dimensions of the linen, the weave, the type of thread, the method of manufacture, the size and the design are all from the 1st century AD, not the much later medieval period. Evidence, remarkably, has been found of pollens and minerals in the weave that only come from the areas around Jerusalem. Also, there are pollens from other parts of the world. Remember that the shroud has moved. Turkey, Italy and France. The pollen trail is perfect and shows the route the shroud took from Israel up, finally resting in Turin, but of course beginning in Jerusalem. Crucially, Jerusalem pollen was found in the shroud, and this particular pollen only appears during the months of February to April. The crucifixion of Jesus took place in April. There are also deposits of soil. They were found in the areas on the feet, the nose, the left knee, and other places. The soil was located below the surface of the blood, and it is confirmed to be Jerusalem dirt. This is consistent with the victim falling whilst walking barefoot and hitting the ground before he was crucified. The bloodstains have been tested and confirmed to be from a human male, and they are type AB. Now, if you've read my book, actually, The God Conundrum, you'll realize why this is quite hard for me to talk about, actually, because it's very involved. Now we're going to look at pathology. Pathology examinations show that the blood flows in the correct direction for a man who's being crucified, from the wounds around the wrists, the feet and the head, and from the puncture mark in the heart. Forensic examinations indicate the bloodstains show a clear separation of blood and a watery fluid around the largest stain on the side of the chest. Now, this is the site of the spear wound, or a spear wound, and it matches perfectly with the description in the Gospel of John, where he describes witnessing water and blood flowing from the side of Jesus after he was stabbed. The blood here has been, of course, forensically examined, and it's been confirmed to be post-mortem blood. The victim, therefore, was stabbed after death, which again corresponds with the Gospel accounts. So, as well as the obvious wounds of a standard Roman crucifixion victim, the shroud, the image, shows hundreds of crisscross lacerations caused by a whip, exactly as the Roman design, one that rips out the flesh as it's cracked. There are also wide abrasions over the top of the whip marks, over the shoulders and the back, lacerations right across the back and the shoulders. This shows that the person carried a heavy weight, a roughly cut beam or something similar that gouged into his back over the top of the whip marks. Now, this is bonkers. The image does not show the hands with thumbs. It's like that. It's not like that. It's like that. Because the thumbs are tucked underneath the hands. Now, this is medically proven. When a person is crucified, the iron spikes being pushed through the victim's wrists will sever or seriously damage the median nerve. This causes the thumbs to mechanically retract into the palms, therefore tuck themselves under the hands. Wow. Again, if you've read my book, you'll know how I'm feeling. The chemical evidence of the blood is crucial. Red blood cells rupturing causes a variation in colour and intensity. Now, and science indicates that the blood was shed by a person who suffered a traumatic death. You think this was made up? This is science coming in here. Now, over the years, several scientists and organisations, all with medical backgrounds, have analysed the shroud. They have unanimously reached the same conclusion. And that is that this shroud wrapped the body of a real crucified man, and the injuries correspond exactly to the description in the Gospels of Jesus' torture and crucifixion, including head injuries, which wouldn't be normal in a standard crucifixion, corresponding exactly with a crown of thorns, which in fact was more like a helmet of thorns because it was responsible for more than 50 puncture wounds. So, without any opposition from scholars or historians, it is agreed that the first documented appearance of the shroud, as we know it today, was in 1354 in Liry, France, when it was presented as Christ's burial shroud to the dean of the church by a knight named Geoffrey de Charny. Now, there are much earlier documents actually dating back as far as 68 AD, 30 years after the crucifixion, which mentions an image of our Lord and Saviour at full length. Another is the image of Edessa from 212 AD and one from Constantinople in 944 AD, which describes an image of Christ as an image not made by human hands. So using the latest technology, including AI, shows that the image of the body, both front and back, when brought to life in 3D and joined together, perfectly match and create a fully formed human figure. Now, no amount of theorizing over a medieval forgery could ever explain this. It truly is impossible. So how then was the image made? Well, the only possible explanation scientists have been able to come up with is that the scorched image was created by an enormous, mind-boggling burst of light radiation, which left an imprint on the fabric so superficial that it has no noticeable depth or thickness. It's less than that of a human hair. And therefore, the image doesn't penetrate through the linen. It's just on the top surface. So experiments using UV lasers can produce similar discoloration, but the intensity required to replicate the shroud just isn't scientifically feasible, as the cloth would simply disintegrate. But radiation seems to be the only answer. The instantaneous flash of radiation required to create the shroud is calculated scientifically to be so intense that it would amount to several billions of watts of power. Or to put it another way, a way for me to maybe get my head around it, enough to fire up several nuclear power stations. So this extreme energy must have been emitted in a tiny fraction of a second, a nano fraction more, and then the fabric would simply have vaporized. So nothing like it can be replicated in a laboratory environment, and no artist, no forger can explain how the shroud was made. They've never been able to do it. So if science ever reaches a point where it can actually demonstrate how the Shroud of Turin was created, and we're a long way off that, then science, I believe, will simply prove that to do it, it would take a technology and an intelligence far in advance of what we can currently understand. Never mind what the apparent medieval forgers could understand. So it's all about light and energy, isn't it? A lot of this is. In fact, in my book, light and energy crop up all the time. Is it just a coincidence that the Shroud of Turin and the creation of the universe seem to have begun in an instantaneous flash of light and energy? The Big Bang, light and energy. The Shroud certainly points towards the universe with its technologically advanced three-dimensional coding, but it also points to us. It points to the creation of human life. This is all new to me. I'm sure it's new to you. Let me know. But this is scientifically proven. A human body emits low levels of light, a constant glow. It's only recently been discovered. Although the glow cannot be seen by the human eye, researchers believe that by monitoring the faint light emissions from patients using specialist equipment, doctors might one day be able to determine the overall body condition and diagnose certain medical conditions just by the light we naturally emit, a light we cannot see. That's interesting. But even more interesting, in 2016 it was discovered and observed and filmed for the very first time that at the precise moment of human conception, when the sperm meets the egg, a bright, instantaneous explosion of light occurs. A flash of light and energy when life comes to be. Did something similar, but on a scale unimaginable, bring Jesus Christ back to life? And is the shroud material evidence of that event? Many people believe so. David Rolfe believes so. And along with many eminent scientists and specialists, including those who have studied the shroud for almost 50 years. They're so convinced that the shroud is indeed the burial cloth of Jesus Christ that David Rolfe himself has offered the British Museum $1 million if, using all of their massive resources and expertise, they can recreate the shroud as its experts said the medieval forger did. Don't forget, according to the British Museum's own scientists in 1988, they said all it would take is a piece of old linen and a bit of dodgy know-how. The British Museum has declined to take up the challenge. So based now on what you know about the shroud, what are your thoughts? Thanks for watching.